Pokémon games, like many RPGs, have optional areas you can explore in order to get extra items, learn new information, or add new members to your team. Generally speaking, in Pokémon you don't bat an eyelid at these areas, especially if you're an experienced player. However, Generation 1 of Pokémon has an optional area that has always perplexed me a little bit. I'm talking about Southeast Kanto. It's a relatively large area of the map, comprised of routes 12 through 15, and connects Lavender Town to Vermilion City and Fuchsia City further down. As I noted earlier, this area is totally optional, and you could easily beat the game without ever coming here. So what's the point? What nice RPG treats and extras can we find here? I'd like to take a closer look to figure out what function it serves in the world of Kanto. The first thing to note here is that it is full of trainers. Route 12, the bridge over water with fishermen everywhere, is relatively normally distributed, but the other routes are densely packed with trainers of all kinds. Junior trainers, beauties, bikers, bird keepers, the like. One of the first ways to look at these routes is that they're good for gathering information for the Pokédex, because you fight a lot of different trainers and different trainer classes. And there's some merit to that idea, but maybe not enough to justify its lack of anything else or to motivate a player to come here. You can see a handful of Pokemon here, including trainers using electrodes, horsies, Poliwags, that sort of thing. You could see a small number of Pokemon and get their location data to find them later. Each route has at least a couple of Pokemon that you might be lucky to see elsewhere. However, you could also easily get bored and turn around before you see any, because the majority of the Pokemon here are ones you've fought before, a lot. There's plenty of Pidgeys and Pidgeotos, Oddishes and Glooms, Weepinbells, Koffings and Grimers from the bikers. And let me tell you, toiling your way through your 6th Koffing only to get to your 5th Pidgeotto gets old really fast, even in spite of any new information that might be discovered later. Obviously there's only 151 Pokemon in Generation 1, so the pool is limited, but even with that in mind, the battles are tedious. So the value of the new Pokemon you might find here is unbalanced against how boring it is to fight through all of the generic trainers. To speak briefly about the wild Pokemon, there is Pokemon that only really appear here and in the Safari Zone. However, given that the Safari Zone is a mandatory visit as part of the storyline, most players will just opt to catch those Pokemon in the Safari Zone. No one is going out of their way to Southeast Kanto for a Venonat that they can easily catch in the zone. Even Ditto can be found in 2 other locations, one of them being Route 23 on the way to Victory Road, which would be a better option for time travelled and Pokemon seen. I think on the information gathering front, Southeast Kanto falls flat in offering very few unique Pokemon encounters, as most can be found elsewhere some way or other without having to go out of your way. The next thing I might consider for whether an area adds value is items. What unique things can I get here that might greatly help me on my journey? And to this end again, it does have some merit. You can get the TMs for Rage, Swift, and Payday here, though none of these are very good moves in Generation 1. You can also get the XP All here, which on paper sounds useful, but the EXP All is basically useless in Generation 1 due to a bug with how it divides EXP. You also need to catch 50 Pokemon to get it, which, coupled with its buggy operation, makes it a disappointing reward acquired in a disappointing landscape. The routes have some vitamins and a PP up, which are good, but hardly make visiting the area absolutely essential. So I guess there's more value in coming here for the items than the Pokemon, but I'm still not really convinced that it's worth it. The next thing we might look at is the design of the area. What does the layout add to the game that is interesting or unique? And to be sure, this area has some design unique for Kanto. Nowhere else has more fences or boardwalks per square mile. No area has more people simultaneously fishing while never being seen to catch anything. Few places can boast as few patches of encounter grass as this place. The fence maze here makes Viridian Forest look like a straight path. And you know what? All of it kind of sucks. I find absolutely no pleasure in cycling eternally down the coast, only narrowly avoiding trainers with 4 Koffings while also finding no interesting Pokemon until I get to Fuchsia. Another way to look at Southeast Kanto is to compare it to the other options for travelling to Fuchsia. You fundamentally have 2 ways to get to Fuchsia at this point. You either go down the southeast from Lavender or Vermilion, or take Cycling Road from Celadon. Cycling Road is dead straight and all downhill, filled with trainers as well, and even more limited options for catching. But at least the design is novel. As far as I know, Cycling Road is the only area in the game that has a concept of gravity while you're on a bike. Now, obviously there's not a lot of fence mazes around Kanto, but by this point I've already crossed Nugget Bridge and beaten the water gym, so I'm not sure I really care about repeatedly fighting fishermen just to get to an annoying maze that has a couple of unique Pokemon to encounter on the last route. Frankly, this area could probably be totally water-based like East Hoenn, and that would be some kind of an improvement. Sorry, I'm getting off topic, back to the point. What world building or exploration function does Southeast Kanto fulfill? What were they aiming to do with this area beyond use the space that they had? It's not really clear to me, but I'd like to hazard some guesses that are perhaps a bit more generous to the developers. Say that they thought the map design was actually really good, that the boardwalks and fence maze are fun to run and bike around, the small islands with items on them are neat, and that a fence maze with trainers that appear to be passable after being beaten but in fact stand to block your path are a cool challenge. I can't say I agree with this, and I think the concept of having to carefully avoid trainers arranged in a tricky pattern is done better at other points in the region anyway. The Route 8 arrangement is a lot of fun to run through on the bike, as when it's done successfully you can avoid all of the trainers, but in multiple locations a single wrong step means a fight. Watching top speedrunners do this section at speed is really satisfying, and it's genuinely some of the more enjoyable movement in the game. Likewise, ignoring the strength use, the movement in Victory Road is also quite tense for avoiding trainers, but done right can be very fun. The fence maze is a neat idea, but having to fight lots of trainers regardless of how you navigate it and only having one single exit kind of takes some of the options out of it from an exploration perspective. Next glass half full view. Say that the Pokemon you can get here are really cool and unique to these locations. Not quite, as we discussed earlier, and I think this would be a more redeeming factor in the routes if it were the case. The Pokemon you can get on these routes can all be obtained elsewhere, which is kind of a shame. Some unique encounters would make it worthwhile to fight through the nearly 3 dozen trainers you inevitably encounter coming through here. Even the fishing encounters can be found elsewhere and in some cooler optional locations like the Seafoam Islands, so I can't really give them a pass here either. Now, some people might say, not every area in a game has to have a definite function or purpose, and without further interrogation, I might agree. But if I flip the question and say, why is this in the game? What purpose does it serve? And the answer is nothing. Then I'm led to ask, why is it here? When they could have put in something more interesting or purposeful. I don't actually want my games to have filler content that's just there to fill space, especially in the context of Generation 1 of Pokémon. The developers had so little room to work with and packed in so much content, most of which is quite good, but they just did not hit the mark with this one. If your project was going to be so tightly packed, wouldn't you want every bit of it to really count? Finally, I would like to conclude with a positive comparison. One of the main optional areas in Generation 1 is the Seafoam Islands. They are difficult to access, unlocked after earning several gym badges, and have some clear reason for visiting. Their interiors contain a mechanically unique puzzle with a clear reward for completion and being able to catch Articuno. Aside from Articuno, there are Pokemon that cannot be caught anywhere else, in Seal and Dugong, and rare evolved forms of Pokemon such as Kingler, Golduck, and Slowbro. This is a good optional area. If the curious player decides to explore this location, they have to figure out a puzzle with mechanics unique to that location, catch Pokemon that they cannot easily find elsewhere, and have the chance to fight a legendary bird. They could plausibly leave this optional location feeling rewarded for the effort that they made to come here. I cannot say the same for Southeast Kanto, with its repetitive and grinding battles, previously seen and easily obtained Pokemon, and unimaginative map design. This is all to say that it's not just a case of the limitations of Generation 1 preventing innovation, and much the opposite. They clearly could and did do better, but just failed to in the case of Southeast Kanto, and that's just kind of unfortunate. That's all I have to say on this. I sense some people may disagree with me on this one, and that's fine. I'd love to hear about how I'm wrong. If you do disagree with me, please tell me why. What do you enjoy about Southeast Kanto? What is so great about it? I'd love to know so I can see whether my reasons hold up to the criticism. Thank you for watching.